What if I told you that the most spiritually awakened people are often the ones sitting alone at 3 a.m., staring at their ceiling, wondering why they feel completely dead inside? This isn't talked about in spiritual circles, but it should be, because what comes after enlightenment might shock you. There's a phenomenon happening right now that nobody wants to discuss. People are experiencing profound spiritual breakthroughs, seeing through the matrix of illusion, understanding deeper truths about reality, and then complete emotional flatline. You've tasted awakening. Maybe it came through meditation, psychedelics, or a life-shattering experience that cracked you wide open. For a moment, everything made sense. The cosmic joke revealed itself. You saw through the programming, the conditioning, the endless rat race that society calls normal life. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling empowered and purposeful, you felt nothing, empty, like someone pulled the plug on your internal battery. The earth literally shifted under your feet. What once felt solid and familiar suddenly became alien territory. You penetrated the matrix of deception, witnessed the mechanical nature of your behavioral loops, heard the cacophony of the external world, and then came the profound quiet. Initially, this stillness felt divine, liberating even, like escaping from a house fire into pristine atmosphere. But gradually, subtly, purpose began to evaporate. Not dramatically, but like a gentle vanishing act, as though your spirit dimmed existence's brightness and never restored the illumination. You ceased pushing forward, ceased the endless performance. Not from hopelessness, but from a kind of holy fatigue, a hollowing that paradoxically brought strange tranquility, yet unsettling motionlessness. Then the inner voice emerged, a soft, persistent inquiry. Why do I feel this profound emptiness now that I've finally glimpsed reality? This is the contradiction no guru prepares you for. We're conditioned to expect that spiritual revelation will ignite our life mission, that penetrating illusion will make us burn with divine purpose. But for many, particularly the highly sensitive, the eternal seekers, the empathic souls, the inward explorers, it accomplishes something entirely different. It empties the container completely. It scrapes away every false intention until even longing becomes unrecognizable. And in that emptiness, we mistake enlightenment for emotional numbness. I remember a dialogue with a cherished friend, intellectually brilliant, spiritually refined, well-versed in the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, Krishnamurti, Alan Watts, and other luminaries. She emerged from her dark night of the soul, carrying crystalline understanding. She described seeing through the mirages of identity, accomplishment, and external validation. Yet 2 months afterward, I discovered her motionless in bed, gazing at nothing, floating in a stillness she never anticipated. I used to weep about my lack of productivity, she confided. Now I'm indifferent to whether I accomplish anything whatsoever. I believed awakening would set my soul ablaze. Instead, I feel completely extinguished. The great depth psychologist Carl Jung spoke directly to this crossroads. He characterized it as the sacred landscape between ego dissolution and authentic self-emergence. A threshold space, terrifying in its quietude, where motivation previously fueled by social masks and external approval dissolves completely, leaving only the raw material of what remains unformed. This isn't dysfunction. This is the individuation process, the chrysalis phase of consciousness, where the caterpillar completely dissolves into formless essence before emerging as the butterfly. It represents the psychological death required for genuine rebirth. But we must not mislabel this void as spiritual regression. Within the heart of this apparent emptiness lives a deeper calling, a quiet pulse of soul truth waiting to be acknowledged. Not the motivation to prove oneself, but the impulse to simply exist authentically. To move not from need for recognition, but from inner resonance and alignment. This exploration isn't about despair. It's about that crucial moment after awakening when the old fuel dies completely and the new energy source is still forming in the depths. Jung understood that the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. The loss of motivation isn't the ending. It's the sacred beginning of living not as a persona, but as an authentic soul. Carl Jung, the architect of analytical psychology, predicted this strange and silent fog that descends after awakening long before it became a topic in modern spiritual communities. He didn't shroud it in mysticism or euphoric language. He spoke with penetrating clarity about the soul's descent into its own mysterious depths. Once the unconscious begins to awaken, Jung observed, enlightenment does not come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. While these words may sound poetic, they carry a terrible truth. Genuine awakening doesn't crown you with bliss, it strips you naked. It unravels the scaffolding of the false self. It initiates a slow and sacred dying, the death of who you believed yourself to be. The collapse is internal, but far-reaching. Your former motivations, ambition, achievement, recognition, begin to dissolve like mirages. The timelines you followed, the goals that once pulled you forward, even the structures of identity that defined your relationships, your work, your daily rhythms, begin to fade in the light of deeper truth. But here's where the psychological nuance becomes vital. Your ego doesn't disappear or die. It simply becomes profoundly disoriented. The script it once followed has been incinerated, but no new script has yet emerged. The result isn't laziness or apathy, but a profound spiritual limbo. You're no longer asleep, but you're not yet fully awake into what comes next. This is the mystery Jung called the nigredo, the blackening phase of alchemy when the ego has been dismantled, but the authentic self hasn't yet claimed the throne. In modern terms, it appears like demotivation, but in Jungian language, it's a holy pause, an in-between space where the soul retreats inward to rewrite its fundamental myth. Yet our culture fears this silence. Jung warned that the modern world does everything possible to avoid this phase, to pathologize it, numb it, medicate it, because it cannot comprehend a transformation that doesn't resemble progress. But what you're experiencing isn't regression, it's initiation. It's not dysfunction, it's sacred descent. This isn't depression in the clinical sense, though it may share some shadows. It's the soul refusing to participate in a life it no longer resonates with. And Jung believed this was the beginning of individuation, the sacred becoming of the true self. Most people never speak of this part, do they? The ache after the light, the silence after the revelation. But this silence isn't empty. It's formative, and if you can learn to stand still inside it, to listen to what it asks of you, you may discover that what appears like demotivation is actually the beginning of deeper alignment. The world tells you you're lost. Jung would say you're being reformed by something far more honest and authentic than anything you've known before. If you've been drifting through the haze that follows awakening, staring into the stillness where your spark once burned bright, understand this: you are not broken. You're undergoing a profound psychic shift that our culture has no name for. A metamorphosis so deep it doesn't merely challenge your thoughts, it reconfigures the very architecture of your inner world. The ambitions that once ignited fire in your chest, the deadlines, the goals, the 5-year visions, the motivational mantras of hustle culture now fall completely flat. Not because you failed, but because the very structure that once housed your motivation is disintegrating completely. Jung foresaw this unraveling long before it was ever whispered on digital platforms. Let's understand it clearly. For most of your life, your energy came from the persona, the constructed self, the mask you wore to navigate the world successfully. That identity, the one who craved admiration, validation, applause, wasn't a flaw. It was a necessary stage of human development. As Jung wrote, the persona is a system of behavior imposed upon the individual by the expectations of society. But when you awaken, you begin seeing the mask for what it truly is, a performance, and the performance no longer compels you. You can't chase applause once you've seen that the stage is constructed from pure illusion. The result? The goals you once revered now feel foreign. They were written by a self that no longer exists within you. This creates an eerie silence, like an actor stepping off stage and forgetting their lines, not from confusion, but because the script no longer resonates with the soul. You feel aimless, not because you've lost your direction, but because you've shed the identity that required a destination. You didn't lose your drive. You outgrew the fuel that once powered it. What stirs within you now isn't absence, but a sacred pause. A quiet void preparing to be filled by something truer, something no longer forged from performance, but from pure presence. The ego pushed relentlessly. The soul waits patiently. And in that waiting, something holy begins to emerge. Carl Jung believed that life's aim isn't to exalt the ego, but to integrate it into a larger, deeper psychic totality. We're not here to serve the ego's desires, but to refine it, temper it, and align it with the self, the transcendent center of our being that connects us to the greater whole. He called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of moving from fragmentation to inner unity, not to become the self that receives praise, but to become the self that is genuinely real. The self, unlike the ego, is unconcerned with approval or performance. It's not driven by ambition, but by alignment. Its only desire is to express what is authentically true. So after a spiritual awakening, the psyche begins a sacred recalibration. What once felt exciting now feels hollow. Your system begins rejecting everything artificial, forced, or inauthentic. That includes careers built from insecurity, relationships based on roles, or even vision boards crafted from your old self's fear of inadequacy. This inner purification often feels like liberation and disorientation simultaneously. You're shedding the false, but what now takes its place? Jung cautioned that many get stuck here. Some awaken and fall into spiritual bypassing, mistaking transcendence for escape. They float above life, call everything an illusion, and convince themselves nothing matters. But detachment isn't the same as disconnection. The self doesn't want you to disappear from the world. It wants to inhabit it through you. It wants to incarnate, not evacuate. It seeks not withdrawal, but embodiment. But before that embodiment, there's a threshold. Jung described it well, though few recognize it when they're experiencing it. It's the gray space after awakening, the void that comes not with bliss, but with bewilderment. It doesn't look poetic. It doesn't trend on social media. It looks like sitting quietly while the world speeds past, unable to explain who you're becoming. Jung would say, "You're not failing. You're in between. You've stepped out of the ego, but the self hasn't yet become your foundation." This liminal space isn't a mistake. It's initiation, a descent into the unknown that modern culture has no patience for. Stillness is misdiagnosed as laziness. Pause is confused for paralysis. So you begin judging yourself, and that judgment becomes the very wall that blocks the energy your soul is calling home. This phase is sacred. It's chrysalis, not collapse. And if you can stay here long enough, if you can resist the urge to rush or retreat, you'll begin to feel it, the quiet pulse of something deeper rising. The self isn't loud, but it's constant, and it's waiting for you to trust what cannot yet be named. Carl Jung had a word for this sacred reversal of energy: enantiodromia. The phenomenon where something, when taken to its extreme, transforms into its opposite. Nowhere is this more evident than in the aftermath of awakening. You move from the manic striving of ego, "I must do everything," to the hollow stillness of soul. Why do anything at all? The pendulum swings not because you're broken, but because balance demands it. The psyche, long imprisoned in performance, finally collapses into rest. This descent isn't pathology, it's initiation. In mythological language, this is the archetype of the hermit, the withdrawal from the world before rebirth. It's the sacred cocoon where the caterpillar dissolves into formlessness, no longer a crawling self, not yet a flying one. It's the goo phase, unstructured, undefined, unproductive by every modern standard, but absolutely necessary, because the psyche is undergoing alchemical transformation. And transformation, Jung insisted, begins in darkness. Not in bypassing, not in good vibes only, but in descent. This is where modern spirituality often loses its depth, by glamorizing awakening while avoiding its crucifixion. Jung insisted that the shadow, the rejected, uncomfortable, unconscious parts of ourselves, isn't something to escape, but something to integrate. Shadow work isn't advanced-level spirituality. It's the very foundation of becoming whole. And in this state of nothingness you now occupy, the unconscious is rising, not as a villain, but as a messenger. What you once repressed, your grief, your rage, your unmet needs, begins surfacing because now, at last, there's space. So the ego panics. It wants action, clarity, a name tag, but the self quietly and persistently whispers, "Let go. I am forming something deeper." This is where the real work begins, not in achievement, but in surrender. Not in clarity, but in witnessing. The psyche isn't malfunctioning, it's metabolizing years of noise, illusion, and false striving. It halts your drive, your ambition, your hunger, so you have no choice but to sit with what you've buried. And it's in that stillness, in that haunting void, that you begin to remember. Then, almost imperceptibly, something stirs. A new form of motivation arises, but it's nothing like the old. It's not born of anxiety. It's not urgent or performative. It doesn't roar. It hums. A soul-led impulse to move, not because you must, but because it would be a betrayal of truth not to. Jung called this the emergence of the self, not as an abstract ideal, but as a living, breathing compass within. It doesn't chase. It calls. And what it calls you toward isn't success, but wholeness. So you've crossed the threshold and stood in the silence. You've tasted stillness, not as stagnation, but as sacred pause. You've wandered through the inner night where no voice called out and no light showed the way. And now something ancient begins to stir. Not as a roar, not as lightning, but as a quiet, inner knowing. A soft pulse that doesn't urge you to return to what was, but invites you to build what has never yet been. This is the first whisper of the self, not in language, but in feeling, in pull, in presence. Carl Jung called this the symbolic life, a life no longer ruled by ego or convention, but guided by the deeper forces of the soul. Once the ego has surrendered and the unconscious is honored, life ceases to be a game of survival and becomes an unfolding of meaning. And here's the paradox. It may look beautifully ordinary. When the self begins to lead, you no longer hustle, you respond. You're not driven by fear of missing out, but by quiet conviction of inner alignment. You stop chasing clarity as a prize and begin recognizing it when it arrives, often dressed in simplicity. Living from the self doesn't mean you'll always be energized or certain. Fatigue, doubt, and grief still pass through. This is the texture of human life. But what disappears is the constant ache of self-betrayal, the dull exhaustion of performing a version of yourself that no longer fits. Instead, something shifts. You find yourself creating even when no one applauds, saying no even when yes is expected, following wonder rather than ticking boxes. You begin choosing peace over performance. This isn't inertia, it's a new fuel. Not adrenaline, but alignment. Not pressure, but presence. Jung called this living symbolically, not as escape into fantasy, but as return to soul. You begin trusting the language of dreams, gut instincts, symbols, and synchronicities. Your life becomes a dialogue, not a monologue shouted into the void, but a conversation with the unseen. What does that look like? Sometimes it's as subtle as different questions. Not, what should I do? But what is quietly calling me? Not, what's the plan? But where is life nudging me? Not, how can I prove myself? But what feels true? You stop trying to dominate life and start participating with it. Ambition doesn't vanish. It transforms. It becomes devotion. Devotion to what is real, what is true, what brings you alive. And strangely, that devotion moves mountains. It gets things done, but from wholeness, not depletion. Now it's sustainable. Now it's soul-powered. This is the self's motivation, not to impress, but to express. And it leads you, often without effort, to create, to teach, to heal, to serve. Not because you should, but because your whole being says yes. So if you've been wondering where your spark went after awakening, remember, it's not gone. The old fire burned away so a deeper flame could emerge, one that won't flicker in the storms of the world. Jung never promised ease, but he did promise depth. If you are here reading this, then you are already walking the path. This is not the end of your awakening. It is the beginning of your becoming. If something within this message stirred you, if even a single word mirrored your inner experience, I invite you to let your voice be heard in the comments. Have you encountered that soul whose presence feels like home? Or are you still walking the sacred path back to yourself? Your story, however unfinished, may become the lantern in someone else's darkness, the very sign they didn't know they were searching for. And if someone close to you is silently struggling with the illusion that love must hurt, that self-abandonment is the price of connection, or that they are unworthy of peace, share this video with them. Help me reach the ones who need to remember. Real love does not demand that we shrink. True connection does not ask for sacrifice of the soul. And the most vital union we will ever form is the one with our own inner truth. Before you go, I invite you to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Here in this space, we journey beneath the surface of things, exploring the hidden architecture of the psyche, the whispers of the unconscious, and how every relationship is but a mirror reflecting our personal evolution. If there's a theme, a question, or a wound you would like us to explore in future videos, leave it below. This space breathes because of you. Your voice is not only welcome here, it is essential. Thank you for showing up, not just to this video, but to your inner work, to the sacred labor of remembering who you truly are. And always remember this: when the right person appears, your soul will know, not through fear, but through peace. But until that moment, let your most intimate relationship be the one you cultivate within. That is the foundation. That is the home. And from that wholeness, all things real are born. Until next time, I'll see you on the path.